That is super cool. My name's Dave. I grew up in the 80s, and so video games are near and dear to my heart. And so I know a lot of you did too. Let's do this. Turn to the person next to you, introduce yourself, and then tell them your favorite video game growing up. Now, if you don't have a favorite video game, there are a lot of other great churches in Brighton that you can worship at, okay? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just teasing. Maybe, but if you didn't like video games, maybe you can do a board game or whatever game you like playing, all right? Let's get to know each other. Ready, set, go. Be friendly. Good job. How many of you said Pac-Man? You love Pac-Man growing up? Yes. How many of you said Asteroids or Galaga or one of these spaceship shooting games? Okay, very good. How many of you loved Zelda? Okay, Nintendo, Zelda. Okay, good deal. How about, now we're in Nintendo season here, so how about Contra? Anybody like Contra? Do you remember the code? Up, down, left, right, B, A, select, start, or something like that. And then what happened? You got 30 lives. You got 30 lives, which is basically like saying, Mom, I will come out when I'm 21, okay? Because I can play this game all day long. Well, you know, we grew up with some of these things, and they kind of impact the way you see the world, apparently, because it was 2 years ago that we did Minor Prophets. We were sitting around as a teaching team. And if you're brand new with us, you need to know we do everything as a team. It's not just me, but we don't want to build the church on any one person. So we have a team for everything. And the teaching team is really easy to tell us apart because of the length of our hair, okay? Kevin is completely bald, and Keith has a little short hair, and then I have a little longer hair, and then there's Brad Tate, okay? He's got the lovely locks. So, but anyway, there's four of us. So we're sitting around, and we're trying to figure out what about minor prophets? Because no church does minor prophets. Like, everybody stays in the Gospels, but how do you do minor prophets? And so we were studying this thing, and we were talking about, you know, why are they minor? And we said, well, you know, the reason they're minor is not because that one of them wasn't as good at prophesying as the other. They all had the same ability. It's just that some of their prophecies or some of their books were shorter. And so they came to be known as not like Jeremiah or Isaiah, the big long ones, but just the minor prophets because they just had shorter books, and that's all it was. Brad Tate goes, oh, you mean like Luigi? And we're like, what are you talking about, Luigi? He said, well, it's like when you were playing Mario Brothers. Everybody wanted to be, Mario and Luigi, they had the same skills, they had the same abilities, but nobody wanted to be Luigi. Everybody wanted to be Mario. There's not Super Luigi Kart, okay? It's Super Mario Kart. It's not Luigi Brothers, it's Mario Brothers. And so Luigi's kind of the minor prophet. And so that led into us doing minor prophets with a Nintendo theme, and it just grew from there, and we had so much fun with it. And it kind of gives you an insight into how Brad Tate sees the world, okay? But anyway, so we had so much fun with that 2 years ago. We didn't get to all the minor prophets, and so we decided to do the ones that were left. And so we're hoping that today you can walk out of here, and when someone says, hey, do you know Haggai? You can say, yes, I know Haggai. He's a minor prophet in the Old Testament, and you might have grown up. I can't believe you laughed at that. You are great people. I love you so much. But you may have, if you grew up in church, pronounced it Haggai. And I did too, until a Hebrew scholar said, no, that's completely wrong. It's Haggai. It's Haggai. So I'm going to try to keep it Haggai. But basically, his story is a story of somebody or a people who get a second chance and rebuild their lives. All right? They get a second chance and rebuild their lives. And so let's start out this way. On January 1st, 1962, Decca Records signed the Tremolos. And most of us in here, unless we're way into music trivia, have never heard of the Tremolos. But what you might find interesting is that they picked the Tremolos over another band, saying to the other band, hey, your guitar music is really on its way out. We don't think you have what it takes to make it in the music business. And so they said no to the Beatles. The Beatles then have their heart broken, their dreams are dashed, but of course, somebody at some point gives them a second chance, and they build an incredible music career. Clifton Herring was a high school basketball coach, and he took one look at this young man and said, I don't think you have what it takes to play high school basketball, Michael Jordan. And it's just not the level. Of course, Michael Jordan gets another chance, and he rebuilds an amazing basketball career. There was an employer at a local newspaper who looked at a young man and said, "We believe that you lack imagination and original ideas." They fired him for, quote, lacking imagination and original ideas. And so Walt Disney had to deal with a broken heart, had to deal with getting shut down, and hopefully a second chance then, and builds this amazing life. So here's the thing with Haggai. He is preaching to a people named the Israelites, and they had sort of experienced failure. They had been knocked down, and the reason is because they started worshiping false gods. They started doing things that were against God's will in their sexual practices, in their worship, and different things they were doing. And so God removes his hand of blessing and protection, and the Babylonian Empire comes in and takes the Israelites captive, and they are captive for 70 years. 70 years. And then God hears their cries. God hears their cries for help, their cries for mercy. God says, "Yes, I will remove you." And they then get out of Babylonian captivity because of the hand of God. And they end up going back to Jerusalem, and that is where we find these folks. Now, it's not the whole group. It's about 50,000 of them. And you have Haggai, named Haggai, and he is about at least 70 years old. You say, well, how do you know that he was 70 years old? Because in chapter 2, it actually says that he had seen Jerusalem before the captivity. And the captivity was 70 years old. So here's a guy who's maybe 75, maybe 85 years old. And God is going to use him and to rebuild life. Hey, how good is it, real quick, can we just stop before we get into this? How good is it that we follow a God of second chances? You know what I'm saying? And in my case, like third chances and fourth chances and 34th chances, okay? Because, man, God looks at us and doesn't just write us off when we make a mistake or when we blow it. He doesn't look at us and say, "You're not worth it. You can't play at this level." God looks at us and says, "You know what? I see something in you. I see a potential in you. I see promise in you. And if you'll take my chance, we will rebuild this thing together, and it'll be amazing." And to think that it's never too late to rebuild your life. Haggai was probably 80-something years old. How cool is it to think it is never too late to rebuild your life, and that your best work might be ahead of you? Look at this in Haggai 2:9. It says, "The glory of this present house will be greater than the glory of the former house." In other words, what's ahead of us is the best, says the Lord Almighty. "And in this place I will grant peace, declares the Lord Almighty." That is, experts, theologians will say, that is basically that is his whole prophecy in a nutshell. The best is yet to come. It's pretty cool. But for that to happen, these people are going to have to follow Haggai and follow God in taking that second chance, taking advantage of that second chance, and working to rebuild their life together with God. So I thought we'd look over the shoulder of Haggai and this story and see if there aren't some principles here and how we can take advantage of a second chance and rebuild our lives as well. Sound like a good use of 15, 20 minutes? All right, here we go, because I'm going to go about 45. Anyway, just kidding. I'm just teasing. Here's the first step. Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Here's the first step to rebuilding your life. Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Give careful thought to your ways. Examine yourself. You have planted much but harvested little. You ever feel like that? You say, "I'm not a farmer." Okay, take it out of agriculture. You ever feel like you're working, investing, working hard, yet the return is not commensurate with the effort that you're putting in? You ever feel like, "Man, I feel like I'm working my tail off, but I'm not getting the reward, the investment"? That's what these people were feeling. He goes on, "You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm." You ever feel discontent? You ever feel like, man, if I could just get a little bit more, if I could just move up the ladder just a little bit more, maybe you have the if-onlys. If only I could get married, then everything would be good. If only I could get my kids off to college, then everything would be good. If only I could get to retirement, then everything would be good. We're discontent. And then he says this, he says, you earn wages only to put them in a purse with no holes in it. Come on. You ever get to the end of the month and go, where'd all the money go? You ever get to the end of the month and look at your spouse and go, where'd all the money go? Right? That's happened before, right? So I'm relating to these people. Haggai is preaching now. He's preaching mostly about finances, but I think it translates. I think there's times that you look at your kids and you go, I feel like I'm planting, I'm investing, I'm working here, but I'm not getting the return in this relationship. Sometimes it happens in friendships. Sometimes it happens in a career. I'm working, I'm not seeing. Guys, sometimes it happens in a religion. Now, I didn't say relationship with Jesus. That's something completely different. But a religion where we feel like, man, I'm going to church. I'm doing all the good stuff I'm supposed to be doing. I'm trying to check off all these boxes to earn God's love. And yet I just don't quite feel like I'm getting the return that I'm looking for. You ever feel like something's missing in your life? Like life is broke. Life is not working. Here's the first step to rebuilding your life. You got to admit there's a problem. Admit there's a problem. Quit putting on a smiley face and walking around like everything's perfect, but get real with yourself and maybe with a couple other people and admit there's a problem. It's one of the first steps to the 12 steps. If you've been with the recovery community, they say we admit we are powerless over alcohol or drugs or whatever it is, and that our lives have become unmanageable. So look at the person next to you. Go ahead, look at your neighbor. You're not doing it. Look at your neighbor and tell them, I know you have a problem. Right? I know you have a problem. But I do too. All right? But I do too. So it's going to be fine. I do too. All right. So that's the first step. Admit we had a problem and y'all did it. That's great. Okay. Verse 2 says this. This is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say. You know you're in trouble when God starts looking at a group and saying, these people, okay? These people say the time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. Now understand, when we're talking about rebuilding Jerusalem, we are talking about the purpose of the Israelites back then. Why God chose a people was to reveal himself, his goodness, his power, his holiness, to reveal himself, his nature, his character to the rest of the world. So one of the things that was going to be really important in the center of Jerusalem, in the center of these people, is for them to build the temple, because back then, that's the way God said, I'm going to dwell with my people in the temple. Now God dwells with us in our hearts because of Jesus and the Holy Spirit. That's another sermon. But anyway, back then, he dwelt in the temple. And so the temple ought to be big, and it ought to be beautiful, and it ought to be expensive, and it ought to be amazing, a shining light to the people in Jerusalem, the Israelites, that God is with them, and to the entire nations, that God is real, he's big, he's awesome, okay? So building the temple was a big deal. The time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house, the people said. Then the word of the Lord came to the prophet Haggai. Oh, is it a time for you yourselves to be living in paneled houses, fancy houses, while this house remains a ruin? Here's what's happening. They get back to Jerusalem. God says, okay, let's build the temple. And the people say, well, how about this? The people didn't say yes, sir. Which is, by the way, the only appropriate response when God tells you to do something. Like when God says, hey, I want you to do this, I want you to stop that, I want you to start this, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, the only appropriate response to the creator of the universe is, you bet. Yes, sir. But these people have excuses. These people are basically, well, it's not time, well, it's not, I don't know. These people have excuses. Let me ask you this. If you were a parent, a teacher, a manager, an employer, how well do excuses work with you? When your kids come up to you and give you an excuse as to why they didn't do what you said. when your employee comes up to you and tries to give you an excuse for why they didn't execute the plan. When anybody comes up to you and gives you an excuse, how well does that work? My father was an insurance agent with State Farm for about 38 years. 38 years, and here are some actual excuses on insurance report forms. You ready for this? It says this: the guy was all over the road. I had to swerve a number of times before I hit him. Come on, I like that. The pedestrian had no idea which way to run, so I ran over him. I had been driving for 40 years when I fell asleep at the wheel and had an accident. Well, don't drive for 40 years, okay? This is my favorite. I pulled away from the side of the road, glanced at my mother-in-law, and headed over the embankment. I took one look. I said, I'd rather die. I'd rather die. Now, as silly as those excuses sound to a cop or an insurance adjuster, how silly do our excuses sound to the God of the universe? Well, hey, God, I don't have enough money, or hey, God, I don't have enough time, or I don't think I'm worth. God's like, have you read the Bible? Like, I'm asking you to do something. You say, yes, sir. Do you know what Jesus said? Jesus said, anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. We don't like to think about obey a whole lot, but it is part of following God. We obey what he says. All right, so we admit there's a problem. We get past our excuses. That's number 2. Let's get rid of excuses. Let's get past them. And then let's keep digging into what these guys are doing. They said, remember in that verse that we read, they said, the time has not yet come. Now, guess how long it had been? Now, we know this because in verse 1, it says, in the 2nd year of King Darius, on the 1st day of the 6th month. We know exactly the day that the word of the Lord came to Haggai and he started prophesying. So we know exactly when that happened, and we know when the people got out of captivity. They'd been there 15 years. 15 years they had been saying, hey, we'll get to it, God. We know your house is in disrepair. We got things to do over here. We know what you want to happen. But you know what, God? We'll get to it tomorrow. Guys, I think tomorrow might just be one of the most dangerous words in the English language. Hey, we'll get to it tomorrow. It's procrastination. It's spiritual procrastination, knowing what God wants you to do. James 4:17 says this: if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, well, that's a sin. If you know what you should do and you don't do it, then that's a sin. If you just say, well, I'll get to it tomorrow or the next year or 15 years from now, then that's a sin. So let's get real with each other. We've been confessing. Let's do another mass confession on procrastination. Are you ready? I'm just going to run through a few of these categories. You listen, and then we'll confess. If, as a student, you ever put off studying for an exam or writing a paper or pulled an all-nighter, if you've ever delayed answering a letter or a telephone message, or paying a bill or balancing your checkbook, if your desk at work has any work tucked away that you are avoiding, if you've ever watched TV crews interviewing people at the post office on tax day to mail in their taxes by midnight and thought to yourself, man, I wish I had it together like those people. If you've ever put off going on a diet, doing home repairs, getting your oil changed, seeing a doctor, going to the dentist, if you've ever done any of these things and procrastinated, would you just raise your hand? Oh, doesn't that feel good? Now, how many of you would say, can we just talk about this tomorrow? This is getting a little too uncomfortable. Right? Here's the thing, for most of us, it's not that we don't know what God wants us to do. It's not even that we are shaking our fist at God and saying, no, I refuse, I rebel. It's not even that. It's that most of us are just going, you know what, God, I'm busy doing my thing. I've got this and I'll get to it. It's like the diabetic who says, you know, I'm going to sneak one more donut and I'll start the diet tomorrow. It's the addict who says, you know what, I'm going to take one more look, one more hit, one more drink, and I'll go get some help tomorrow. I share this with my kids. They roll their eyes now, but guess what? They could repeat it back to me. Procrastination is my sin. It causes me such sorrow. I know that I should deal with it. In fact, I will tomorrow. And my kids roll their eyes, and then they get back to their homework, okay? All right, here's the other thing. Now, we got to get past procrastination, got to get past excuses, we got to admit there's a problem, but then look at the priorities of these people. It says in verse 4, is it a time for you yourselves to be living in paneled, fancy houses? That's why they gave you the descriptor there, paneled, because they want you to know, hey, these are like fancy houses they're trying to build, while this house remains in ruins. Isn't it crazy how our priorities can get out of whack? Think about how priorities go in life. For some of you, video games were an incredible priority at a certain time in your life. You'd spend hours. Do you look back on that now and go, what was I thinking? I remember thinking, if only I could get a Tony Hawk skateboard, my life would be complete. And now I think, what do I care? There are certain times in our lives that our priorities, certain things that really aren't all that important become so important to us in the moment. And then at some other time, we can look back and go, really, and have a better perspective on what was going on. I remember, and sometimes it's just this, it's passion, it's fear, whatever it is that makes priorities switch. I was going on a trip with my kids, my wife, my family. It was about 10 years ago, so the kids were pretty small. And we're playing the game where you try to find the alphabet letters along the road. Some of you on road trips, you know what I'm talking about. So you try to find an A on a road sign. You try to find a B on a license plate. And you just try to compete with each other. Well, here's the thing. If you've ever met my wife, you think she's a very sweet, wonderful lady. But you've never played this game with her, okay? I'm just telling you right now. She gets so competitive. It's like she thought we were doing going after the gold medal Olympic alphabet game because we were going through this thing. Now, we get to Z. And Z is a very hard letter to find in the alphabet car game. And so we're all just kind of intense. We're getting passionate. We're looking around. We're going to find it before that person, and we're just getting pretty intense. And then my wife says it. She says, look, kids, a Z, right there, a Z. And there was a Z on the end of the word polecats. Polecat spelled with a Z, and it was basically a billboard for a strip club. And there was a lady on there all scantily clad looking out at you like, this kind of a thing. And my wife is telling my poor little innocent young kids and going, look, kids, look at this, look at the polecats, And in that moment, her priorities are completely out of whack, folks. Completely out of whack. Now, here's what I love about money and time. Here's what I love about your checkbook and your calendar. Is this: they are the perfect measure of your priorities. Anytime you want to know what your priorities are, you don't have to worry about what you think your priorities are, what you say your priorities are, what you want your priorities to be. If you want to know what they actually are, you look at your checkbook and your calendar, and it will show you what your priorities are. Do you get to the end of the month and say, my goodness, it feels like I've got a purse with holes in it? Do you sometimes feel like I'm investing here, I'm planting and planting so hard, but not harvesting the way that I should? Do you feel like something's missing? Do you feel like life might be broken a little bit? It could be that your priorities are actually out of whack. And Jesus says in Matthew 6:33, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and then all these things will be given to you as well. So we're going to admit there's a problem. We're going to take advantage of our second chance, rebuild a life. We're going to admit there's a problem. We're going to get past excuses. We're going to avoid procrastination. We're going to get our priorities straight. And then watch this next one in verse 7. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Go up into the mountains and bring down timber and build my house, so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, says the Lord. Here's the reason that the people, or watch this. when they got out of captivity and they came to Jerusalem, they started building the temple. They started. But some of the locals began to not like what they were doing, so they started criticizing them. And so, maybe it was because of the pain of that criticism that they stopped. The criticism found its way up to the king, and the king apparently maybe thought that there was a rival nation, or that they were going to be building up a nation that might come against him, and so there began to be some political oppression. And so it could be that because of the pain of political oppression, they stopped. This is a little bit speculative, but I don't think it's too far-fetched to think about a people that had just spent 70 years in slavery, who now have come out of slavery and they are free, and their God says, I want you to go and work like a slave. Work hard. It could be that they couldn't get past the pain of swallowing their pride. Or, at the very least, do you know how hard it is in that day and age to climb up a mountain, to cut down timber and bring it down and build a temple? It's just plain hard work. And they might be avoiding the pain of hard work. Guys, here's the other thing we're going to have to do to rebuild our lives is we're going to have to get past this pain avoidance. Because it takes hard work to build a life. It just does. Most of us are trying to grow something. You're trying to grow a business. You're trying to grow a family. You're trying to grow your school. You're trying to grow, whatever it is you're trying to grow, a portfolio, whatever it is you're trying to grow, a team within the business, whatever it is you're trying to grow. Can I give you an equation? Growth doesn't happen without change. Do you agree with that? Like, unless something changes, something can't grow. A little kid can't grow unless their body changes. A business cannot grow without some sort of change. There's new equipment, or there's new facility, or there's new systems, or there's now a marketing department. We never had that before. Whatever it is, a business doesn't grow without change. But change doesn't happen without loss. The little kid that grows up now cannot wear his old shoes. So he's got to get rid of those. The new system that is adopted at work has to replace what? The old system. Oh, I remember the way we used to do things around here. There is no change without loss. As something grows or something changes, something else gets lost in the process. Do you agree with that? There's no change without loss. There is no loss without pain. Because I have to buy the new shoes. There's the pain of that cost. I have to come up with the new system at work, and it takes more, whiteboard sessions and strategy, and bring in a consultant, and there's a pain to that. There's a pain to grow in a church. How many of you have to park a little farther away than you used to? How many of you have to come at a different time? Man, I loved coming at 10:30, but now I come earlier, or I come later, or whatever it is, because I want to create room for new people. We got to build space for people. There's a pain in that. We sacrifice. There are more people. Once you have 5 services, oh my goodness, we used to have 1 service. Do you know how easy that was for me? I come in, preach, weekend, Now it's Saturday night, 2 services, and then 3 services on Sunday morning. And guess what? I get a paycheck for it. There's all these people up here, and all those people back there, and all these people that are serving and serving and serving. There's a pain associated with growth. And let me tell you this. The capacity for growth, your capacity for growth, is directly related to your capacity for that kind of pain. Does that make sense? Everybody wants growth, but not everybody wants the pain of developing the new systems, of investing in the new tools, the self-discipline of working harder, the pressure that comes with bigger bigger departments and bigger budgets and bigger organizations. Guys, that's just the way it is. Just for fun, because I experienced this too. I remember when our staff was just in one room. There were 4 of us. And we would just, it was like every day. It was like a family. It was this close-knit thing. It was just this, it was intimate. It was awesome. It was just the 4 of us. It was great. We had to buy computers. It was only had to buy 4 computers. Do you know how many computers we have to buy now? It's crazy, right? But here's what's funny. I go to the cafe a couple of months ago, and I go and I say, I just want a pop, just like a pop, please. And they say it'll be $1.69. And I said, well, isn't it half off? And she looks at me and goes, oh, do you work here? I said, yeah, but you don't anymore, so sorry for your luck. Do you understand? Like, things change. All right, I understand. All right. My friends, don't be surprised at the painful things that you are now suffering, which are testing your faith. Don't think that something strange is happening to you. If you want to grow muscles, you got to go through some pain. You want to grow an organization, you want to grow a life, there's got to be the pain of following God. All right, and with that being said, as we admit the problem, we're going to avoid procrastination, get rid of excuses, we're going to take the pain, we're going to get our priorities right. But here's the good news, folks. In Haggai, I'm almost done, Haggai 13, or Haggai, see, I did it. Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave this message of the Lord to the people. I am with you, declares the Lord. Isn't that good to know? If I'm going to be doing all this work, all this, that God's going to be with me. And then beyond that, it says this in verse 18. From this day on, from this 24th day of the 9th month, give careful thought to the day when the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid. You see, it says 9th month. Do you remember when the prophecy came? It was in the 6th month. So what have these people been doing for the last 3 months? They got rid of excuses. They stopped procrastinating. They got their priorities right. They decided to march up that hill, grab some timber, bring it down. And it says that the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid. And then it says this, give careful thought, is there yet any seed left in the barn? Until now the vine, the fig tree, the pomegranate, the olive tree have not borne fruit. But from this day on, I will bless you. Guys, I'm telling you, as you start to rebuild your life in God's way, you start to obey, go up the hill, grab the timber. You start to obey God's way. His blessing comes. And that makes all the difference.